What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to College Football Talk with Peter Burtnett. Today's episode, we're going to be taking one final look at the Atlantic Coast Conference in my preview series. Started things out with taking a look at the newcomers to the ACC, SMU, Cal, and Stanford. Then in the video I made a couple of days ago, I talked about the teams that I think are going to be more fighting for bowl eligibility. Well, in this one, I'm going to be going over the teams that I think have even a slim chance at winning the conference, and especially the teams that I think are at the forefront. But before I go into all that, if you're going to enjoy this video, please feel free to leave a like, consider subscribing to the channel, and turn on those post notifications so you're always up to date whenever I upload. But let's dive right into it. And I'm starting things out looking at a game late in the season that could be important for both of these teams. It's North Carolina at home against North Carolina State. Both of those teams are probably going to be, I think, around that 7-8 win territory heading into that matchup, and it could be a big game for both teams. So let's start things out by taking a look at the Tar Heels. North Carolina went 8-5, 4-4 in conference last year. They kind of had a slide at the end of the season. They lost 3 straight, 4 out of the last 6 to end the season last year. The Tar Heels bring back 13 starters, 5 on offense, 6 on defense, their kicker and punter. They had a top 20 offense nationally, and they also ranked number 7 in total offense, in yards per game, both passing and rushing. Leading that offensive charge this year, again at running back, is Omarion Hampton, who rushed for over 1,500 yards, ranking 5th nationally, and 15 touchdowns. Incoming quarterback Max Johnson joins previously of LSU and Texas A&M, and his main target will be J.J. Jones, 46 receptions, 711 yards last year, along with a trio of receivers, Nate McCollum, Kobe Paysor, and Gavin Blackwell. Those 3 guys combined for 75 receptions, just short of 1,000 yards, and 4 touchdowns. Defensively, they have a couple of defensive ends, Kyman Rucker and Desmond Evans. Cornerback, Elijah Huzzy. And then defensive coordinator Geoff Collins comes in, former Georgia Tech head coach. Another guy who's going to be a player to watch is DeAndre Boykins, who's coming back after suffering an injury, missing all of last year. He had a strong 2022 season. And then they also bring in North Carolina State transfer Jakeem Harris. I think the Tar Heels have a chance to do well in the ACC. I think obviously they're going to have a better finish than they did last year, but I think that'll hinge on how they do in this game against the Wolfpack. I've talked about NC State in another video when I talked about their Week 2 matchup against Tennessee. I think that one could be very important, and based on my projections for the ACC, I'll get in the SEC probably in a couple of weeks. I really still think that game is highly important. Heading into this finale game, regular season finale against North Carolina, I predict game by game when I do these things, go through the whole season. I have the Wolfpack at 8-3, and that's because I have them projected to lose that game to Tennessee. If they win that one, then instead they could be 9-2 heading into this one against North Carolina. But the Wolfpack, they were 9-4 last year, 6-2 in conference. They bring in quarterback Grayson McCall from Coastal Carolina. I've talked about him. He had a highly decorated career for the Chanticleers. Then they have running back Jordan Waters coming in from Duke and returning leading wide receiver Kevin Concepcion. Those 2 guys, McCall and Concepcion, will have to revitalize an offense that ranked 100th in passing yards per game last year, but I think the receiver talent that Concepcion possesses, along with McCall's abilities at quarterback, could be big for NC State. Defensively, kind of the 3 main guys, players to keep an eye on: Devin Van, defensive end, and then cornerbacks Aiden White and Brandon Cisse. So those are kind of the main guys for North Carolina State. They have a fairly favorable schedule. They have that game against Tennessee, which is tough. They also go to Clemson on the road, but they get Cal on the road, Georgia Tech, that regular season finale at North Carolina, and then at home they get NIU, Wake Forest, Syracuse, and Duke. I think that Syracuse game is one to be a little bit wary of. I think with Kyle McCord at quarterback and some of the other guys that are transferring in to Syracuse this year, they're going to be a team to watch, even with that game being in Raleigh for the Wolfpack. And I think Clemson, I'll get into them later in this video, but I think that's probably potentially a loss as well. And then that Tennessee one. I would say that Syracuse game is a bit more of a toss-up. So I think 8-3 or 9-2 heading into USC. If they're 9-2, they win that game against USC. They probably miss out on the ACC title game, but they could potentially, if things fall their way, get into the playoffs with that 10-2 record. And they bring back this year 11 starters, 5 on both offense and defense, and their punter. Next up is the Virginia Tech Hokies. Virginia Tech brings back 17 starters, which I think leads the ACC or is one of the leading numbers in terms of production. They have 8 offensive starters, 7 defensive, a kicker, and a punter. They went 7-6 last year, 5-3 in conference, but I think throughout they kind of showed signs of improvement. And they finished pretty strong. They had a 3-game losing streak early in the season, lost 4 out of 5 after a loss to Florida State. But then to close the season last year, they won games against Wake Forest, Syracuse, lost to Louisville, won at Boston College, lost to NC State by a touchdown, beat Virginia on the road, and beat Tulane in the Military Bowl. So after starting just 2-4 last year, the Hokies were able to go 5-2 down the stretch. I think that shows signs that they're moving in the right direction, and they're bringing back a good portion of that team. Defensively, they have the number 4 pass defense in the country, and a lot of those guys are back. They have a couple of pro-level cornerback prospects in Dorian Strong and Mansour Delaney. At safety, they already have Jalen Stroman coming back, but they're going to need to find out who they can pair with him in that other safety position. Keely Lawson is a key player to watch on defense, plus their star, Keonta Jenkins, a couple of other guys, defensive ends, Antoine Powell-Ryland, coming in from Duke, Anais Peebles, Kevin Gilliam Jr. from Oklahoma, Cole Nelson, and then linebacker who should plug in the middle, Sam Brudenfield from Middle Tennessee State. The one, I guess you could almost call it weakness, it was still in the top half of the national rankings. Scoring defense ranked 50th, so they maybe can do a little bit better job in the red zone. I think that's a key indicator of that. And they ranked 57th against the rush, so that could be something that teams try to exploit. Although the ACC, I think, will be pretty pass-heavy this year. They honestly have a pretty relatively easy slate. Their only real tests, personally, I think, are a home game against Rutgers. I think Rutgers is going to be a solid team. I don't think they're going to compete in the Big Ten or anything like that, but they're going to be, I think, a hard team to beat this year. And then obviously at Miami, those 2 games, Rutgers at Miami, are back-to-back, and then they host Clemson. On the offensive side of the ball, they have quarterback Kyron Drones. He was a dual-threat quarterback who came in from Baylor last season, played for the Hokies. They've got running back Baishul Tutton, and then wide receivers Ali Jennings, Jalen Lane, and Daquan Felton. And the Hokies also have 4 offensive linemen. So I think they've got a solid team, a good unit coming back on both sides of the ball. Offensively, they were really good running the ball. They ranked 22nd nationally. They were 54th in scoring, 58th in total offense. They were just 95th in passing, but I think the fact that their quarterback is more of a dual threat guy is probably more the reason for that than, having issues or struggles. But some things that they can work on. The offensive line did take a while to gel last season. When they did, the wins showcase that. So I think if they can continue to gel, again, 4 of them are coming back, and they're also bringing a potential starter in Georgia State transfer, Montavious Cunningham. I think these Hokies have a really good shot at potentially finishing 10-2. They don't have Florida State on the schedule. They don't have NC State on the schedule. They don't have Louisville on the schedule. And they don't even have North Carolina on the schedule. Those are all some of the teams that I'll be talking about or already have in this video as being contenders in the conference. So moving on ahead, though, to Louisville. Cardinals were 10-4 last year. I think they were the surprise of the conference. They were 10-2, obviously heading into that ACC championship game. They had an upset win over Notre Dame. They bring back 11 starters, 3 on offense, 6 defense, kicker, and punter. They had a top 50 offense last year, but they're going to have some changes this year. Coming in at quarterback is Tyler Show from Texas Tech. They have running back returning Maurice Turner, wide receiver Chris Bell, and left guard Michael Gonzalez. Those are kind of the main players to watch on offense. Defensively, they ranked in the top 10 against the run, top 50 overall in a lot of key areas. They have defensive ends Ashton Gilote, not sure about that one, Mason Reiger, and then linebacker TJ Quinn and safety Devin Neal. Those are, again, kind of the key players to watch for Louisville, a defensive unit that ranked pretty highly last year. They have a tougher schedule. I would say almost a much tougher schedule than a team like Virginia Tech. They have road games against Notre Dame, Virginia, Boston College, Clemson, and Kentucky. Obviously, Notre Dame and Clemson are the toughest of those. Kentucky is also tough. They lost to them last year. But really, all of those games are tough because they're on the road. And then at home, they get Miami and even Georgia Tech, I think, could give some teams a little bit of trouble this year. So that's a look at Louisville. I think I would expect them probably to go right around that 9-3 territory, probably 6-2 in conference. Then taking a look at Miami, the Hurricanes were 7-6 last year, 3-5 in conference, another disappointing season. I've talked about them in another video about why I think they might need to win now for if Mario Cristobal wants to keep his job, and if they don't want to have to go through this whole cycle again of bringing in a new coach, trying to build up the program and find success. This is their year. This is their best window. That's because they have quarterback Cam Ward coming in from Washington State, running back Damian Martinez coming in from Oregon State, and among an offense that returns 6 starters, wide receivers Xavier Restrepo and Jacoby George. Defensively, 4 starters return. They also have nickelback Mish Powell coming in from Washington. Defensive end Ruben Bain is kind of an emerging star. Linebackers Wesley Bisanthe, Francisco Mauigoa, and then cornerbacks Darryl Porter Jr. and Damari Brown lead the defense. They have a tough schedule. Some of their biggest games are at Florida, home against Virginia Tech, at Louisville, home against Florida State, and then even at Georgia Tech, obviously a game they lost last year in circumstances that they shouldn't have. The Hurricanes always have a lot of hype around them, and a lot of times, I would argue more often than not, that hype is misplaced, but they were also in quite a few close games last year. I think they were 1-4 in games decided by a touchdown or less, by 7 points or less, so if Miami can turn around some more of those games, you flip around all of those one-score games. In the best-case scenario, that means 4 more wins than what they had last year. That would put them at 11 wins, which surely would get them into the college football playoff. I have them probably getting 9 or 10. But ultimately, I think the ACC comes down to the 2 big dogs in the conference like it has for really much of the last decade or 2 decades, and that's Clemson and Florida State. Taking a look first at Clemson, they were 9-4 last year, and they have a gauntlet this year, but I think they are a team that could do well against that schedule. They open things up against Georgia and Atlanta. I think that one is probably penciled in as a loss. I don't think it's Sharpied in yet, obviously, but I think you can pencil that one in. Then they have kind of a little bit of a tough team in App State. I think that's a game they should win, but it could be some challenges there. Home against NC State. Then Stanford at home. That one should be pretty easy. Then at Florida State, October 5th. That's the main one to watch in the conference. It'll give us an early indication of which team is the favorite in this conference. That game against NC State is big too, don't get me wrong, but that game against Florida State is the ACC game of the year. And then also back-to-back weeks to start November, they have Louisville at home before going to Virginia Tech. And then they finish at Pitt, home against the Citadel, and home against South Carolina. So that schedule, when I call it a gauntlet, it's not a gauntlet to the level of teams like Florida or Oklahoma in the SEC, but it is a tough schedule. Out of all of these ACC teams, they probably have the toughest schedule. But what does their team look like? Obviously, there's the Dabo no transfer policy. That doesn't mean they don't actually accept any transfers. He's not even quoted for saying that, but it's just kind of a joke that they don't really take in transfers. They build through. Dabo even said something like the only transfers I get are high school transfers, I think is what he said. And they have a couple of really good ones coming in. Linebacker Sammy Brown, and then wide receiver Bryant Wesco Jr., kind of switching gears right to that offense. Quarterback Cade Klubnik returns. threw for 2,800 yards last year, 19 touchdowns, 9 interceptions. Running back Phil Maffa replaces Will Shipley, but it's not a case of an inexperienced back coming in and replacing a guy who put up great numbers, did great things at Clemson. Maffa last year rushed for 965 yards and 13 touchdowns, so he has plenty of experience. Then coming in at wide receiver, or I guess continuing at wide receiver, is Tyler Brown, Antonio Williams, and tight end Jake Bringingstool. Those guys combined for over 1,000 yards and 9 touchdowns. Actually, I think just Brown and Bringingstool combined for 1,000 yards. Those were the two guys who led the way offensively. And Antonio Williams, I believe, is coming back from an injury. He was limited to just 5 games last year. So they also have 3 offensive lineman starters. Honestly, their offense last year was pretty middle of the road. Their best ranking was 42nd in the rush, and their worst was 60th in passing. And they were 50th in both scoring and total offense. So pretty middle of the road offense. I wouldn't expect any big signs of growth this year, but if they can kind of maintain that, I think that's good enough to win, because their defense is what really drives them. They really had a top 10 defense in a lot of key areas. Passing defense, they were 8th. And in total defense actually as well. They're very blitz heavy. Some of the teams in the ACC kind of struggled with offensive line issues last year, so that could be an important thing to keep an eye on. Also, real quick, back to the offense, they turned the ball over 22 times, so I think that's something you could see. If they cut down on turnovers, you'll see the yardage go up as well, along with the scoring. So I think if they can adjust that, that can lead to some steady progress. They get some heavy losses, especially in that defensive secondary, which ranked so high, 8th in the nation. Andrew Mukuba is gone to Texas, and Nate Wiggins to the NFL draft. But kind of leading the way in that are a couple of starters come back from last year, Khalil Barnes at nickelback and strong safety R.J. Mickens. And year after year, Clemson does a pretty good job, actually a really good job developing in the secondary. And obviously, you can't talk about the Clemson defense this year without talking about a potential first-team All-American linebacker, Barrett Carter. He leads this unit from the middle, and overall should continue. I mean, last year he was second on the team with 67 tackles, and was third on the team in tackles for loss with 9.5. So overall, I would expect him to continue to lead in that capacity. And then also defensive linemen TJ Parker and Peter Woods lead the way on the line. Then taking a look at Florida State, obviously the team last year that won the conference, undefeated through the regular season in conference play, and left out of the playoff. If that happens again this year, I mean, it goes without saying, but they're not going to be left out this year. They literally can't be, because it's an auto bid. So talking about who they have DJ Wagalele, DJU coming in from Oregon State, a decorated passer. Be interesting to see how he competes being back in the ACC, obviously, formerly at Clemson. And then they also kind of bring in the Bama bunch. They bring in 5 players from Alabama, 5 transfers after Nick Saban retired. Running back Roydell Williams, wide receiver Malik Benson, offensive lineman Terrence Ferguson, linebacker Sean Murphy, and nickelback Earl Little II. So I think all of those guys can be expected to make contributions, especially Williams and Benson on offense. I think even Ferguson on the line, and then Earl Little II is a talented nickelback. And Williams joins an already very talented backfield in Lawrence Toafili and Jalen Lucas. I think that offense can make some pretty substantial strides, even to what they did last year when they ranked 19th in scoring offense, 45th in passing, 52nd in total, just 76th in rushing. But I think having this room come together with all of these guys, they'll have to fill in the shoes of Troy Benson leaving to the NFL from last year, or Trey Benson. But I think they could do a very good job with that, and they're going to be very deep at running back as well if any of those guys gets injured. Defensively, they bring in a couple of other transfers led by Marvin Jones Jr. from Georgia. They bring back this year Patrick Payton, the 2022 ACC Defensive Rookie of the Year. They bring in Sione Lolohea from Oregon State, Tomiwa Dorujaye from West Virginia, defensive tackle Darrell Jackson and Joshua Farmer, and then some of the other names to watch, Azariah Thomas, cornerbacks, safety Shaheem Brown, and Central Cyprus. So Florida State and Clemson, I think those are the two teams it comes down to. I think both teams, actually, when we get to the ACC championship game, will have a loss. Florida State's could come in kind of a couple of areas. I think it could come to Clemson, obviously, that October 5th game. They also travel to both Miami and Notre Dame within 3 weeks. Sandwiched between those is a home game against North Carolina. That's a pretty tough 3-game stretch. And I think Clemson's probably kind of pencil again in that loss to Georgia. So I think both of these teams probably come into this ACC championship game where the winner obviously clinches and the loser is maybe a little bit on shaky ground. So the ACC championship game will be a huge one. I'm going to save that prediction for when I go over my I'll probably make a video of just my conference predictions, like conference championship game type predictions. But I think both of these teams will be in a similar position. The winner will get into the playoff, and the loser will be probably right around that 11 or 12 range, which if you're 12, you're probably left out for the group of 5 team. If you're 11, you're probably in. So that is my look at the main contenders in the ACC this year. But let me know in the comments below who you think will come out on top in the ACC. If I had to go with my gut right now, this isn't a final prediction. I think Clemson might win in the regular season, and Florida State might win in the ACC championship game. But that's a very early prediction right now, so stay tuned for kind of a final decision before the season begins. But that's all for this episode of College Football Talk with Peter Burnett. Hope you all have a great rest of your day, and I'm signing out. Peace.